Welcome to episode 59 of the Necronama.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now, and I am that guy in the neighborhood that everyone else watches.
Yeah, we don't really want to discuss why they're watching you. And I am Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of this podcast. And the suburbs, to me, it's rooted with some interesting history, as well as some real life horror.
You know, people always talk about Friends, and I know this is a show you hate with a passion. There's always Friends. Like the which one of the friends would you be? Are you Ross? Are you Chandler? And no.
I'd be the naked guy across.
Exactly. That's me. I want to be ugly naked guy. I want my neighbors so pissed off that I'm there, but they still they don't know what to do about it. Like that's much more fascinating to me. So yeah. And if not that, then I want to be that monkey in the first season. Anyway, so joining us today, because I dragged him here and made him do this, is Michael Stevens. Michael, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you both for having me. I'm a big fan of the show. I've listened to not all, but most of the episodes. The ones I haven't, it's because I haven't seen that film, and so I'm waiting until I see that film first. And really appreciate you bringing me on to talk about The Burbs, which is actually one of those movies that I guess you'd call it a cult classic, but it is something that sticks out from my youth, my late teenage years, as one of those great films. And I was always sort of stunned that I didn't have a lot of friends that seemed to like the movie or even know the movie. And I'm glad after all these years, 30 some years later, it seems that it still has a life, that there's still a lot of people out there that likes it, that enjoy the film. So thank you for coming or inviting me to come on and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the way this started is I had posted that I was going to watch this, and I put it on Facebook, and anyone who's Facebook friends with me knows that if I post that I'm watching a movie, we're probably doing this episode soon. And you had followed up with, "Ooh, when's that episode?" And I was like, "Well, ha ha ha, sucker! Now you have to come talk about it." And but
you
no, the other
me.
I did. The other aspect of that is you go on our Facebook page a lot and you post your thoughts on episodes after you listen to them. And I want to thank you so much for that, because it really is important to me to see other sides of different stuff. Or a couple times you've been like, "Oh man, I wish you would have covered this." And it's something I didn't even think about, And so I just wanted to say thank you for how cool that is, and encourage others listening to do the same, because we want to hear from you guys.
Well, it's my pleasure. Like I said, I enjoyed the show. I'm a huge fan of horror. I've been reading and writing horror stories since I was probably 6 years old. I can't get enough of them. I love the movies. I love the horror genre. And even though The Burbs, I'm not sure I would necessarily classify as a strict horror. It certainly has those elements to it. But I enjoy listening to your podcast. In fact, now that we don't have sports, I have nothing to work out to. So I'll put on your guys' podcast, listen to that while I get my sweat on.
Don does the same thing. He turns on my voice and he's like, "All I got to do is get past a mile and I can stop listening to this fucker. That's all I got to do." And it's really improved.
I listen to you so you put me to sleep, man. I need to hear your gentle voice. Then I feel relaxed. And
Don likes to hear my voice in bed. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it is a very soothing form of white noise.
My wife would not agree. You said that The Burbs isn't exactly horror, and that's obviously true. But one thing I really like about it is I feel like it's one of those, I call them gateway movies, where there's enough horror elements that you can take somebody who says, "Oh, I don't like horror," and they can still enjoy this film. And then you can be like, "Well, you liked that. You should watch this." You know what I mean? And that's how I got, really quite a few people to watch more horror stuff, was just watching these gateway films like this or Beetlejuice or Gremlins. just different things like that. So I
The
guess
Wizard of Oz.
yes, definitely. Oh, I love talking about how The Wizard of Oz is a horror film. But yeah, my main thing is just I feel like people put so much value into what is horror, or this isn't horror, it doesn't do this. And I think that's crazy because at its very definition, fear is so individualized. And so I wanted to ask you guys your thoughts on this. Like, do you think that genres are basically for people to sell things better? Do you think it's for sorting at the library? Do you think there's an actual use for genre outside of those aspects? And does it bother you at all when somebody says that they think a film is a certain genre and you don't feel like it is?
I'll let Michael go first because I've expressed this a few times already on this episode. Plus, you're the guest, so you know.
Okay. Yeah, and I do think it sort of walks that line. I like what you said, gateway film. And it's, I think in the 80s in general, we had a lot of those. You mentioned Gremlins. I would throw out things like Tremors, which is maybe a step up from something like Gremlins. It's a little bit more what you would call classic horror, but it's still based around personalities, character interaction. I think there are definitely people in the world, whether you're talking about movies, writing, anything, that they find their niche genre. They're going after a particular audience who's coming to their work looking for one specific thing. I typically get bored by that. I prefer someone to tell a story, and if the story's funny, it's funny. If the characters are interesting, it's interesting. If the story happens to bring in elements of horror or tragedy or history, I'm fine with that as long as it's good storytelling.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valid.
Yeah, I'd agree as far as where it fits with respect to storytelling. For me, I don't get too dismayed by anybody saying, it doesn't fit horror for them, unless it's an issue of they only assign horror to slashers. I get it as far as like, they have an idea of what it can be or what it should be, but at least that opens it up to where they're willing to watch films that they haven't already listed as horror films in their mind. Like I said earlier, you got The Wizard of Oz is, it's listed as a family movie, as a children's movie, as a fantasy movie, but you can also list it as a horror film because of all the different elements that are included there. I use it in my classes when I'm talking about the Depression era, but also talking about race relations, immigration. Like, there are all these things that can come in because of the way they're being represented on screen as well as how they're represented in the book. And I do the same thing with an actual film that's listed as a horror film with Night of the Living Dead, to talk about the Cold War, to talk about race, to talk about gender, talk about all these different elements and aspects, to where someone can see a horror film and then transition into thinking about other aspects of life, of history, political symbolism, imagery, all those things. But I think one of the more recent film that had to struggle with this was The Shape of Water, where you watch it and you're thinking it's this, oddball, sci-fi romance that's taking place. It's a horror movie. It's just cast as a romance movie or as a drama. But it's all about the horrors that these people are living with in the 1960s that a lot of people didn't think of when we look back on the 1960s as being things that anyone dealt with. Being in being a gay man in the closet, or being a single mother, or being an overworked mother, a black woman in the 1960s, being a deaf mute. Like, you've got all these, or being a mute in general. Just the in general way that people are isolated, fearful of what other people deem is going to be normal, because they don't fit into that. And I think you can put horror anywhere. And as James has said before, it all comes down to fear is everywhere. Horror is in everything. So it's real easy to get people into the horror genre by breaking them of that that idea that, hey, it's just Freddy, it's just Jason, it's just Michael Myers, it's Leatherface, Chucky. Like, that's what horror is. And it's a whole lot more complex than that.
Well, and I mean, I view it, the one thing I will say in the other direction is that genres are important for expectations.
Okay.
I don't want, I have a cousin, Leslie, and Leslie only likes happy endings. Okay.
Ugh.
And so I think in that way, it's important. You don't want some audience member going in and having the wrong expectations because it affects storytelling. It's why stories follow similar patterns and formulas over and over again, because you have that promise to your reader or your audience that this is the journey we're going to go on. And with horror, you never know. Will you get a happy ending? Will you get a totally fucked up ending? Will you get the most depressing, horrible thing ever, Train to Busan? Or like, what's going to happen, you know? And I think that in that way, genre is important just for those expectations. But with that said, I also really feel like, especially short stories right now and anthologies and novellas, people are embracing like just mixing genres so much. There's a great novel by Josh Malerman called Unbury Carol. And I mean, this thing's a Western, a fairy tale, a horror story, drama, and like 10 other things. And I can't even begin to put it in one genre because it hits all of these notes so well. And it's just a fantastic book, and it has like one of my favorite villains ever. But if I went in, I think, oh, it's Josh Malerman. He wrote Bird Box, so it's this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, I had different experiences with genres in terms of my own experiences, because I used to watch and read everything. I've been, speaking of horror stories, I've been married twice. Just kidding.
No, none of us care that you're kidding because we're all like, yeah, I feel that.
Totally different the spell. My first wife, it had to be if we're going to sit down and watch a movie, Disney happy endings. She couldn't, like even Lord of the Rings, she almost walked out of the theater. She couldn't watch Stand By Me because Kiefer Sutherland's character had a knife. There are so many movies we would go to, and I'd say, I don't think you can do this. And, I really want to. Walk to a theater, 5 minutes in, she's out. That was my first wife. So I went like 8 or 9 years where I almost, unless she was out of town or asleep, I almost never got to watch anything that I wanted to watch except, happy stuff. My second wife told her she's going to put on the independent horror film channel. We're going to just stream horror movies. So for like 6 or 7 years, it was 6 hours of bloodbath on television every single night. And you go through those two, extremes. You really become appreciative of those artists out there that take the approach of we're going to mix a little bit of life in here. Because I think, particularly if you look at most of the films Don brought up, all those films, what really makes them great is not so much, well, they're horror or they're fantasy or they're this or they're that. It's all of them really take on some pretty heavy social issues. A lot of them have a lot of political commentary going on in there. So beyond just what kind of film is it, it's a discussion of issues that are that exist beyond the film, and it's trying to expose that. And I think if you ask me about horror in general as a genre, what I would say is it's one of the best ways for us to approach the really serious issues facing our society, facing our world, and to allow us to have that sort of cathartic release where we experience the horrors without actually having to like go throw our face into it.
Definitely.
And whether it's like, a slasher film or something a little bit more lighthearted like The Burbs, there's a lot of value in that. And so I'm always drawn to it. And Burbs in particular, to me, is sort of, like I said, it has those elements to it. It does take that. But it exists for me as a comedy that makes a lot of important points, has a lot of insight about how we choose to live our lives. And so that's what I'm interested by the most, anyway, in this film.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, let's jump into the film and talk about it since we kind of meandered away from it.
The music at the very beginning, sounds a little bit like the music in Beetlejuice, that kind of playfully creepy, but not really creepy. But the very next scene, after we see the lights going and, Hank's character's out there watching this sort of weird thing happening from the basement. After that scene, the very next scene, it's the paperboy, and there's like this happy, peppy music that reminds me so much of, the kind of the soundtrack to E.T. or even Poltergeist early on, like this happy, peppy thing. They're in the suburbs. And so when I look at this, I see there are so many elements of this film that I think are clearly pointing directly to, and if not attacking, kind of playfully mocking a lot of the old Spielberg movies. I mean, even just the fact that Corey Feldman's in it. And I know Corey Feldman was in a lot of things in the 80s. But, you go back to some of those early Spielberg movies, it's like Feldman was all over, particularly with Goonies, but Gremlins and everything. Spielberg gave us this kid. And so it just seems to me like there was, I don't want to say it was like a biting satire, but to me, when I look at this, it just sort of screams, because so much of Spielberg's work in the 80s was set in the suburbs, about the suburbs, and just the way neighbors interact and the way characters develop and children grow up within the suburbs. To me, this was sort of an entirely different look. Instead of looking at the kids riding around on their bikes and seeing what they're doing, let's look at their creepy parents. Their parents are really creepy. I kind of walk away from this film with that.
I like that a lot. One of the things I really noticed this time around was the importance of the wives in the show. And whether it's Carrie Fisher, who's very, she's accepting of how insane her husband is, but she doesn't want anything to do with it. And then you have Mrs. Rumsfeld, who's like the trophy wife, but she's still basically smart. Like, they don't make her a complete airhead in this, And I thought that was interesting in and of itself for the year that it was released. And then you have Art. Oh, Art's wife. Art. Like, I didn't even realize he had a wife the first time I was watching it until she comes home. And I thought that was kind of interesting in and of itself. Just these different relationships and how they play into what the guys do in the film. I thought that was kind of an interesting place to start.
Well, most of the characters in this film are kind of caricatures. I keep thinking of them as avatars. We never really actually get to see full fleshed out human beings. They're stereotypical. Yep. And they're very much, a small slice of their actual identity. The guy across the street, that's the gun nut. That person, that's the vegan who likes to eat at Chiba Hut. That's the get off my lawn guy. We have little glimpses of who these people are. And so I do think that's interesting. It kind of stood out to me because the wives in this film, even as you pointed out, the trophy wife, she knows what's going on. Like, she understands. She's smarter than just some pretty woman who married a rich guy or a guy with more money than her. And so I thought that was sort of interesting that this film does sort of present the women as like the calm, rational ones, where the men are all just sort of like crazy little goofballs.
I was going to say all the wives are the straights and the men are all the stooges when it comes to telling this story. But yeah, you do see how the women or the wives play off the husbands, and the husbands almost have to be reined in by their wives. And I didn't think about it myself, but as I'm reconsidering it, there are these moments where, Carrie Fisher's character, Carol, she tries to talk to Ray, who's played by Tom Hanks, about relaxing, taking his time off, vacation, and so you get this idea that they're in the 80s, he's being overworked, he's got all this stress he's got to deal with, and she's sitting there thinking, I need you to relax, I need you to enjoy this time, I need you to, let's go to the lake, let's go on vacation, let's do this type of stuff, to where she's not being that doting wife who her husband says he's going to do something. It's kind of like, okay, honey, well, let me go ahead and bring you, your slippers, your robe, something to eat, and something cool to drink. I'm a problem solver. I'm going to try and figure out how to make things better for you, because I would expect you to do the same for me, as opposed to you expect this out of me and it's a one-way street. And the same thing with Bonnie Rumsfeld, where she's there with her husband, and it's kind of it's this odd relationship where she doesn't seem as hell-bent about, this patriotism and military culture as her husband does, which makes me think like this guy's full of shit. and she's just sitting there thinking like, well, he'll go garden with me, he'll do all this stuff with me, I'll let him have his cute little hobby. And and then there's Art's wife that, again, we don't see until the end, but we get an understanding that she is not there to accommodate Art. She's not there to nurture Art. She's not there to kind of let him believe his delusions. She's there to kick his ass, because at the end of the film, he's more scared of her than the fact that his house is on fire.
Right?
It's like two things. One of the characters is like, "Hey, Mr. Weingartner, your house is on fire. Hey, Art, your wife is here.
My wife's home.
My wife's home." And, his house, like the firefighters are already rushing into his house to put out the blaze, but he's sitting there like, oh shit, how am I going to explain this to my wife? Which makes me think about, as James pointed out, if we had a different week, like this was taking place a week later, Art is not running around messing with the Klopex, because his wife would basically tell him like, no, you need to mow the lawn, you need to go clean out the garage, you need to do this, because all signs point to she is in charge of that relationship. She's in charge of that marriage. And, he's one of those people that he needs someone to guide him, whether that's a spouse or a friend or whatever. He needs somebody to lead him back on the right road.
When she seems like she'd probably know where Walter is, so none of this would have happened anyway.
Yeah. Did you try calling his daughter?
There's not, they don't ever try anything. I always think that's one of the interesting things of this film is that, they're finding femur bones. The neighbors carrying out this weird, driving out of the driveway and pulling up to the street and, getting this big, huge bag of trash and hitting it with it. It never occurs to them, hey, this is actually a human bone that just got dug up. Maybe we should call the cops. Maybe we should call someone. It's just all, their minds have just run wild, and they're just, it's, to some extent, this is like the first staycation movie. I'm trying to think if there's another movie where it's about someone sort of taking a week off and just hanging out at home. Huh. And so maybe this is it. This is the first staycation movie. And in that place where you don't have that responsibility and Art doesn't have his wife and you're just free to run around with the boys all day, stupid stuff happens and you don't make the right decisions, or at least within the context of this film, you don't.
No, I'd agree with that. That's every time that Don and I go to a convention. So
yes, we're unsupervised adults. We have no idea what to do.
Even as I'm thinking about it, like even Corey Feldman's character, he brings like the girl like on a date or whatever to watch The Neighborhood. Like even she is the straight man going, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, so yeah.
He's having a party. They're all hanging out on the porch like a meme of Michael Jackson eating popcorn. Like, here it goes.
Don't leave yet. We just called the pizza dude.
Did they ever? My God, who left him that kind of cash? He had like 200 pizzas in there. This is nuts.
Well, he was
what probably happened? His parents probably left money for the painters, and he was like, "Fuck that! I can paint the house myself, Mom and Dad," and pocketed the cash.
I that's going to be headcanon for me going forward. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that, but you're probably right.
I'm assuming he's 19 in the movie. He's supposed to be 19 because he's obviously underage drinking, because the way they kind of it's kind of accepted, like, oh shit, the kid's doing it here. Like, what harm is there?
Yeah.
So it seems like he's underage and kind of the neighborhood kid that doesn't necessarily get into trouble, but isn't necessarily a saint. But yeah, when you mention Corey Feldman, the one thing I think about, and we talked about this earlier, James, the whole idea of these men, not just the way they're playing off their wives or playing off their female counterparts, but the way that they're also playing off of adolescents to where they've got this, as Michael pointed out, they're all on this staycation, and they're unsupervised, or they have very little supervision. And when they don't have that supervision, they revert back to being kids with the level of curiosity that they have, and the idea that, calling the police doesn't make sense to them, because it's kind of like, we need to find out what's going on. It's our duty to do this. Kind of like with the Goonies. When you watch this as an adult, you're like, why the fuck are these kids going through the sewers and all this shit for, looking for all this stuff? This makes no sense. Makes sense as a kid. And just like it makes sense as an adult child, which these guys are, that they're going to solve this mystery. They're going to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, reverting to adolescence is probably the biggest theme in this film. Whether it's begging Carrie Fisher so that Ray can come out and play with you and kicking the curb when he can't, or, just how they like ring the doorbell and run off. That's one of my favorite parts. They go up to the Klopex porch and they're like daring each other to push the bell, and then they do, and then they just tear off running. It's so weird.
Well, even with like our first introduction to Art, he's in someone's backyard with a gun.
Right.
Shooting at a crow. That's not something, maybe a kid will go out there with a BB gun or something like that, but adults don't typically do that. That's generally not.
Right.
Regardless of gender.
And apparently Art doesn't normally do this, because Ray's like, Art's got a gun, and he's totally scared because he knows this can't possibly end well. And he goes running out there. So I guess it's good that we know that Art doesn't normally do this.
He's at home. His wife is gone on a vacation, business trip, whatever. And that's what happens. He probably had nothing to do. And so he figured out he was going to do something, which is what got all of us into trouble as kids growing up in the 80s.
Exactly. Way too much.
Oh, yeah. So we talked a little bit about the reverting to adolescence, and I think that really plays into what we were already talking about with the relationship with the wives. But the thing I want to point out here is that Corey Feldman, while he becomes childish still because he wants to watch all this and he wants the excitement and he loves this stupid street and all the chaos that's happening, he still reverts to a different childhood than they do.
Okay.
Like they go back to their teenage, like not even teenage. It's like that like 11 tweens, to 13. Like 11, 12. Yeah,
they're 11 or 12 and he's a teenager.
Exactly. And I love that he doesn't have that connection with them. Like he thinks they're crazy. He wants to watch the stupid shit they do. He's not buying into it. He's not going along with them. I really like that he's separated out of that. And I think that it's really good characterization that he doesn't join them.
Yeah, he only joins them like that one night that Art takes him out to go get Ray and they have a beer. But other than that, you're right. He never goes to the house, never goes in the house. He's not in the backyard. He kind of like he serves as an audience member, just like any of us who are watching the film. We're just thinking like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Definitely. Yeah.
How many felonies have you guys racked up so far?
There's a couple things about that too, though. I mean, most of the characters in this, they're in their 30s to, I don't know how old Rumsfeld's supposed to be in this time, but probably like late 50s, 50s, somewhere in there. They grew up in a different kind of America, a different kind of neighborhood. Corey grew up in the suburbs. He's used to, this is what you do. You look out your window. You're a voyeur. Just watch these people. And so he's separated from them. He knows them. He thinks it's funny. He thinks it's great. But, based on the way he was raised, what you're supposed to do in the suburbs is, don't get put on a show. Sit back and watch it. And I think the interesting thing about that, Don brought up that scene where, he's out there having the beer and they're taking that walk. Like, that's a pretty important scene to me in this film, because that's the scene that really gets the conspiracy theories and the urban legends churning. Because that's when Art's like, he starts talking about, hey, this guy named Skip and, his house burned down and all that sort of stuff. And, they smelled the bodies and everything. And, they're all there listening to it. Corey's character doesn't buy into it. He doesn't get, he doesn't take the bait. He doesn't, swallow the hook. Whereas Tom Hanks' character is immediately like, yeah. Like, he doesn't know the story. He kind of remembers something. I think he says something along the lines of, yeah, I remember something about that. And so that kind of sets the ball moving on the fact that, yeah, our neighbors are killers. But not for Corey's character. He's just like, you guys are crazy.
I just noticed that Corey's the one who openly watches everyone. Like, everyone else is like peeking out the window or like, just like yelling, Art's got a gun. So like you're kind of watching from a distance. Corey's literally out there going, hey, I'm fucking watching all you guys, like, and making an event of it.
Yeah, inviting all his friends, getting pizza.
But I think that goes back to what you were saying, that he was raised in the suburbs, because I feel like, like even my age, like I was raised in the suburbs, so it was normal to me, and, but like my parents grew up on farms. And to this day, my mom doesn't realize that she's the suburbs police. Like, she watches everybody. She knows everything about everyone in her neighborhood. And like, to the point she knows like which cars they drive and when they leave and different shit like that. Like, she's fucking crazy. That's all I'm saying. She doesn't listen to my podcast. It's fine. And but it was always like normal to me. Like, it annoys me. Like, when my mom's like, oh, so-and-so is doing this, I'm like, I don't even know who the fuck that is. What are you talking about? And she'll ask me like, well, what are your neighbors like? Do they do stuff like this? And I'm like, I don't know my neighbors. Like, I've lived here for, I don't know, almost 10 years. And I don't know the name of the guy next door. And that blows her fucking mind, But for me, it's because I grew up with that. And what my mom does now was totally normal in that neighborhood when I was growing up. Like, everyone knew everything about me, and it made me nuts. And I don't miss that at all. But so I do think it's interesting how Feldman is just out in the open like that, because it's almost a big fuck you to everybody. It's, you're all watching the same shit. Well, I'm fucking watching you.
Well, you've seen that split between Gen X and the baby boomer generation, which is, Rumsfeld, Ray, Art, and then of course, Feldman's group is going to be Gen X. So you got that generational split there, where there is that divergence from what would have been seen as or deemed as normal, where, yeah, you don't sit out in the middle of the street or the middle of the cul-de-sac to talk about your neighbors or to look at your neighbors. You talk about them behind closed doors with somebody that you're close to, or at least you perceive you're close to. And then you watch them through your blinds, or you watch them from your porch, but you make it look as though you're not looking. Because suburbs are nothing more than a rehashing of small towns where everyone knows your business, or at least they have an idea of what your business is. And then they will spread what they know about whatever's going on and ask questions like, oh my gosh, the water guy has been in that house a little too long. I wonder what's going on. And then you see the water guy like zip up his pants as he's walking out the door. Oh my God, Miss Johnson's getting screwed by the water guy. There are all types of things that come up. Whereas, yeah, Corey Feldman's character, he would be out there painting and saying like, holy shit. Oh man, the water dude's been here 3 days of this week so far. I think he's banging Miss Johnson. And that would be the way it is. Like he would probably say it on the porch within earshot of Mr. Johnson getting home, like, hey, you've been getting a lot of water deliveries this week. And then, it starts something there where he can go ahead and call the pizza dude and sit outside and wait for, the the hijinks to ensue inside of the Johnson household.
Yeah, for Corey, it's not, when the water dude leaves pulling up his zipper, he doesn't see that as scandalous as maybe, the neighbor across the street might.
Right.
It's just
funny.
It's funny. I've got to tell everyone, this is the funniest thing. Her husband doesn't even know, or something like that. So that's an interesting point. I do think this movie is definitely, I think Feldman's character represents that sort of the typical Gen Xer at the time, somewhere late teens, crawling into the 20s. And the way they approach everything is so different from the way, Tom Hanks and Art and, the Rumsfelds approach it anyway. And it is very much a generational difference that's being painted there. We haven't brought it up, but I think it's kind of a unique thing to talk about right now because most of us probably live in some form of suburb, I'm assuming. And for the last 4 months, we've been trapped inside in particular, and we know nothing but our suburbs. I mean, maybe you're going out to the grocery stores. I know there are people out there who actually do have to physically go into work. So I just think it's sort of an interesting movie to compare to what we're going through right now, where you have people who for over 4 months, all they really know is their neighborhood. That's all they're seeing. And so they're looking out the windows every time you hear a noise. I find myself, I was never the type to know anything about my neighbors. Like James was saying, you live somewhere for 10 years, you don't know your neighbors until something really horrible happens. There's a major storm that blows the roofs off, or there's some sort of fire truck or police truck down the road or something like that causes people to come outside. But you don't know your neighbors. But I find myself more aware of my neighbors now. Just because I'm stuck here all the time. And so when I do hear noises, I do find myself peeking out the blinds a little bit more, like what's going on there? What's happening in the world out there? And I think in a way there's kind of a unique comparison between this film and just the internet, because all of these characters, I said earlier, they're basically avatars. We get like these little cartoon presentations of a personality type. And that's all we're experiencing in this film, but that's also kind of what you experience in a suburb because you don't know your neighbors. You know the vehicles they drive, how they dress. Maybe you get a sense of their income or what they do on the weekend, but you don't tend to have those conversations. And yet there's part of us as human beings that we need to have some sense of confidence in our environment, that it's safe, that we understand what's going on. And so we're always kind of looking for whatever clues, whatever information we can actually get from the people around us to kind of figure out, okay, who are these people? Am I safe here? Do I have to worry about anything? And when you're only given little pieces of the puzzle, when you only have a little bit of information, most of us, for better or for worse, are going to start filling in the gaps with, our own biases, our own superstitions. And that's what we see happening in this film. I think that's kind of what we see happening in the world in general, but particularly online. So I would throw that out there.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I always call Facebook the ultimate panopticon because we're always watching each other. And then, the suburbs are, of course, a panopticon in that everybody's watching each other. And that brings me to the next theme I'd like to talk about, because if we're watching the people that are like us, and we're wondering, what are they up to? What threat are they to me? I have to watch them to see what's happening. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, this family from Eastern Europe moves in. You know nothing about them, and they're kind of weird. And they don't take care of their lawn, so they definitely can't be good people, right? And then there's all these urban legends that Art's throwing around. So, Don, you want to talk a little bit about outsiders moving into the suburbs?
Yeah, this is great because those of you who listen to this, I know you enjoy my nice little history lessons I throw into each one of these podcasts, each one of these podcast episodes. But the whole aspect of the outsider within the suburbs in the 1980s was still something that we were just starting to approach. Because after World War II, with the FHA loans and the GI Bill and tract homes and the buildup that was taking place in the late 1940s, early 1950s, places like Levittown, they were highly restrictive as far as who was going to be allowed to own a home there, and it was highly discriminatory against immigrants, single mothers, African Americans, Jewish people. Basically, in a lot of these places, you had what were known as covenant contracts, which stated you cannot lease this home or sell this home to X type of people. Now, the language changes depending on where you are, but some of them were very vague, and it just said undesirables. And so what the neighborhoods would do is, in order to keep their home values stable and increasing, they policed who the houses were sold to or who was going to have the home rented to them. And sometimes you had neighborhood associations that got involved to where you sued somebody if they violated the covenant, or if somebody came into the neighborhood that shouldn't be there, or they would raise money to buy the home somebody else from doing it. Now, there's sometimes ways that realtors played around with this, where they would bring a black family to come look at the house, and they would get that person to buy it. And then you would then get in the head of anybody else in that neighborhood, like, yeah, there are black people planning on moving here. You want to move before your house is worth nothing. And you see this kind of brought up in the film because this family, now thankfully, the fears are valid by the end of the film. But I think what would have worked a whole lot better is if these feelings, these preconceived notions were unfounded, because that would fit more into the history of housing practices. The Klopeks are an Eastern European family. They're immigrants. I mean, they're not American as far as what we would kind of define as being American. They have a funny sounding name. They don't speak English fully or clearly, or at least with a vast vocabulary. They look different. Least
they don't speak it the same way we do.
Yeah. And that's the thing that freaks people out in these neighborhoods, especially in the 80s, because that's just that's just a repeat of the 1950s. This fear of outsiders, fear of people who are different. You could even have it, I'm surprised Rumsfeld, or they don't allow Rumsfeld to make a reference to Soviets. Like, they're Eastern Europeans. Oh, we got commies moving into the neighborhood, because he thinks he's fucking Rambo. You know?
Well, and that's the first. He's the first one to give us any real personal detail about the Klopeks or the foreigners next door. So that's like the first actual detail outside of the exterior of their house that we learn about.
And nothing else matters except that they're foreign to him. Like, even when they go in the house and meet them, it's this whole thing of, oh, everything they have is so weird. It's so different. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, what are you eating? It's those same. Now, the film ramps a lot of things up because they're making a horror comedy. But those feelings that some people have are real, because I've moved into a neighborhood and the welcome party came out to see whether or not I was actually moving in or if I was one of the moving people. And within 5 minutes of unloading my car at the time, I had half the neighborhood in front of my house asking me, hey, what's your name? What do you do for a living? Oh, how many of there are you? Do you have any kids? How many kids do you have? And you just see this, I guess, this way that people have processed it or made it part of their culture, to where they have to investigate all these things to find out if you're worthy of being in the neighborhood, despite being able to afford being in that neighborhood.
I'm glad you brought that up. It was actually something I'd never really thought about before until I watched it again for this. I wasn't sure when I was watching this movie whether this was just an artifact of how Hollywood worked back in the 80s. But no one in this film, everyone's white.
Yeah. Well, except for the detective is oh my gosh, I forgot the comedian's name. His last name is Ajay. But yeah, the only black person is the detective.
Yeah, but he doesn't live in the suburbs.
No.
So that was something that definitely stood out to me. And I didn't know whether it was, hey, that's just how Hollywood worked back then, that should be a lesson to us, or whether the movie was trying to say that there's some very serious white problems in the suburbs.
I mean, I lean that way. I definitely think it's purposeful. I feel like suburbs have always been gatekeepers, and trying to keep. We can't have people like that around us, like Don was saying, it affects house prices or whatever else. And so to me, it was very, very purposeful, especially when you bring in the detective later, and he is purposely on a higher level than a normal police officer. And I feel like that's a nod to, we're not bashing black people, they're not welcome in this suburb.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I do feel like if the neighborhood was more diverse, then Art and Ray and the others wouldn't have given as much of a shit about this Eastern European family who never did anything wrong.
Except for kill all the people.
I don't know. I would
La 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 la.
I'm going to challenge you on that because I would love to see a remake of this. I mean, at least in my head, because it's not going to get remade because, you know, we're funny about cult classics. I would like the idea of a remake of this film, kind of like American Beauty, where you've got the diverse neighborhood, but then you've got that one guy who shows up who thinks he's normal and hates the fact that his neighborhood is the place he's moved into is diverse because that's not what he expected in the suburbs, and he's the outcast.
I would almost, I would have him have been there forever. So, like, it's changed around him.
Well, like Gran Torino does that. I just realizing it does change for, I think the guy's name's Walter, but, you know, Clint Eastwood's character in that film is basically the same issue where his neighborhood is changing. He doesn't want to move. It's becoming highly Asian and primarily Hmong people from Southeast Asia. And he doesn't like the fact that it's changing because it used to be an all-white neighborhood. I can't remember if he was Polish or Irish, but it was a Polish neighborhood. It was an immigrant neighborhood, but these are the wrong kinds of immigrants that have moved in. But I don't know. I think it comes down to whether we're talking about that film, Gran Torino, The Burbs, or even American Beauty. It comes down to what you were sold as far as what the suburbs are supposed to be, or what houses are supposed to be like, or your neighborhoods are supposed to be like. And now there's something that doesn't belong. You know, whether that's the Klopax or anybody else.
Yeah. It's that the de facto segregation that, you know, so many people, regardless of race, ethnicity, you know, they look, I want to live in this neighborhood, I want to live in that neighborhood. It does become part of the decision-making factor for a lot of people.
Right.
And I think that's an element that's, you know, I don't know, I'll have to think about that. It just occurred to me that, yeah, there is this sort of, it's not just that the neighborhood's changed, it's that you no longer have control over where you live and what's going on in your neighborhood.
I wonder if that's how Walter feels about everyone around him. Like, they're all way younger than him. Like, is he like, with these fucking idiots, you know?
Well, that's kind of why he trains his dog to go poop in their yard.
Well, I mean, he spends all that money on the upkeep, so why would he want Schnookums to poop on that lawn?
Did you know that the dog is the same dog that was in Silence of the Lambs?
Oh, really?
Yep. These are the weird things I learned. Does that mean that
Walter is related to Buffalo Bill or Buffalo Bob?
It makes you wonder what's happening in his basement, doesn't it?
Interesting question. That is, you kind of brought it up earlier, Don, the fact that this movie actually, you know, at the end of it, could have really made an important statement about, well, you know, they came up with all these conspiracy theories and urban legends, and their foreign neighbors were monsters, and then find out at the end, well, we just blew their home up because we're actually monsters, and that could be a really good movie. I wonder though, or
Walter was the killer.
That'd be awesome.
That would be kind of interesting. But if it turns out that, hey, it just ends like that, and, you know, hey, we're idiots, we're the monsters because we're doing all this stuff and we're full of judgment and like looking out our windows and, you know, just leaping to conclusions about everything, do you think we would still be talking about this film?
I think so, because I think it would be I got to disagree, Jay. I think we would. Because it would be more of an indictment. I don't think it would have the same cult following, but you would be able to talk about it because it would have that indictment of the Reagan Revolution and the 1980s, you know, xenophobia that was ramping up again. So I think there's the ability to analyze it from an academic perspective, but then also from a horror perspective, where there is that moment where it's not the monster we've created in our heads that's out there, you know, that's going to attack us. We were transformed by the fear and the paranoia that we had into becoming monsters, which, you see it in, well, shit, you see it now, but you see it within any society where someone thinks that there's an outsider that is harming them. People who become anti-immigrant start spewing all types of things, start spewing all types of rhetoric, and they become more susceptible to becoming racist, bigoted, xenophobes, because they've dehumanized that other person so much to realize that they're the ones that are fucked up. I was watching a couple of things earlier today, and one had to deal with this guy who runs an organization called Life After Hate. And he was a neo-Nazi for years. And he realized at a certain point, he's like, holy shit, I was turned into a monster because of all this rhetoric. And here's why people join these groups. Here's why people become so filled with hate. It's because of X, Y, and Z that leads them to this destination. And they become the monsters to people that had no effect on them, had no direct impact on them, because they wanted to believe all the rhetoric that someone else was spewing by saying, these people are the problem in our society. We need to get rid of them and everything will be fine.
I want to back up for a second and tell you why I don't think that we'd still be talking about it.
Okay.
Number one, I don't feel like the 80s were ready for that. And true. I feel like Tom Hanks would not have signed on to do the film if it ended that way. And that in itself would make us not be talking about this. With that said, I do feel that it's problematic in that, and this actually came from a conversation I had with Don, because I wasn't thinking this way, and he pointed it out to me. It becomes problematic because it proves that the outsiders are a problem. Right. This entire movie proves that the outsiders were really doing terrible things exactly as we expected. And we are right for being all up in their business and blowing up their fucking house. Also, it's not their house, just to point that out. But I don't feel that the 80s were ready, so I don't think it would have gotten that cult following. And I think that this movie would be completely lost. With that said, if it came out today, I think that the film ending the other way would be a smashing success, because we do want the social commentary, and we do want these more intellectual endings or commentaries on what we're thinking about already. So I think it would depend when it came out, but all things being equal, I do not think that we would still be talking about it.
Yeah, but Tom Hanks did Bachelor Party where a donkey was doing cocaine.
And that's still great. That's the 80s. The 80s were ready for that. They weren't ready for foreigners.
I think that's one of the things I was thinking about when I was watching this, is that if you grew up in the 80s, you know two very different Tom Hanks. In the 80s, Tom Hanks was the comedic actor. You thought it was weird when he did Punchline and Biggs, like, wow, that's kind of a little off-kilter for him. But he did Volunteers and Bachelor Party and, The Burbs, movies like that. It wasn't until Philadelphia and, once we get into the 90s that Tom Hanks really starts doing more serious, heady roles. So maybe this would be a movie Hanks would have taken in, say, 94, 95 to follow up Forrest Gump, or something like that. But yeah, I'm not sure. It is sort of one of those things, because part of the humor in this movie is that you're just laughing at how stupid these people are, how judgmental, and they're going, Art's up on the telephone wires, cutting a wire. They're doing all this really silly stuff, and you're judging them. And then at the end, you find out, no, joke's on you. They might have gone about it in the wrong way, but they were right.
He almost didn't take the role as it is. This is the first time that he played somebody's dad, and he didn't know how that would affect his image in Hollywood.
Oh, that's kind of interesting.
And it's so weird to me, because when I look at it, I always see him as a dad type, even like Forrest Gump, right, or what. I mean, I know Forrest has a kid, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I automatically associate him with that. Like, he is America's dad to me. Like, he's that quintessential actor that plays the weird dad. And, the weird dad who thinks he's normal. And that's kind of fascinating in itself, not to get too far off topic, but isn't that what we do with humans? Like, my dad is always dad, you know, it's not, I don't view him as a 17-year-old kid that was out drinking and racing cars, you know, like, it's kind of interesting how that works because of when I was born and what I saw him in.
It's a good point.
Yeah, that's one little aspect about, I mean, just the suburbs in general is, you know, all these people around you, you only know what you experience with them, right? You didn't see your dad driving around, you know, when he was 16. You know, I'm sure my mom went out and partied when she was in her teens. I don't know. I'd like to tell myself that didn't happen, or at least she told me it didn't happen. We don't see that. All we do see is, you know, mom making breakfast, dad going to work, or, you know, dad cussing when he's working on the car, or mom going to work. You know, that's how we know them. It's kind of like that in suburbs. Not the same, you know, depth of relationship, obviously, but you only know your neighbors from when you walk outside and you see what they're doing outside, and that becomes the basis of your entire judgment. Problem is, like you don't know your mom as a kid, you don't know your dad when he was a teenager. It's hard to sort of even imagine that. But with your neighbor, all you know of them is, well, that's the one who drives the pickup.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the creepy thing about living in a suburb. And that's exactly why we don't go out and talk to our neighbors, because we have no information about them. They're complete riddles. And the more information we do find out, we're kind of put in that situation where, well, I got to solve this riddle. And in the absence of information, I'm just going to sort of leap to conclusions and connect my own dots.
Well, and like, I don't know how it is like where you are, Don, but like, you know, Phoenix houses are very cookie cutter, right? So like, I can look at a house and know the floor plan in my neighborhood based on the shape of the house, right? And I was thinking about how weird that is, because I've had moments where I'm like, why the fuck would you put the TV there? That doesn't make any fucking sense. Why do I care? I'm not going in their house. I'm not watching their television. Why do I give a shit that they have a TV in what is my dining room? You know, like, because
the suburbs teach us there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things.
And as long as I'm on this kick, I want to add that as much as I make fun of my mom for watching everyone else in the neighborhood, God fucking help you if you turn around in my driveway. Like, I'm instantly on that shit. I don't know what it is. That's like the ultimate sin in my mental understanding of my neighborhood. Stay the fuck out of my driveway. What are you doing? Turn around somewhere else.
Here are the rules when it comes to suburbs. Because you're not alone with that one.
I don't have a lawn, so I'm safe there.
Don't turn around in my driveway. I mean, that's pretty much universal. So you're not alone in that one. Don't walk on my grass. You know, if there's a sidewalk, take the sidewalk. If there's no sidewalk, you walk by the curb, or you walk in the street. There is no walking or crossing through my yard. You know, we become very territorial with the property lines, so much to the point where people argue over where they can put their fence, even when there's not an HOA, where they can put their fence to where it's not. It still covers their yard, or at least covers a part of their yard, but it doesn't impede on or encroach on the neighbor's yard. Because one, you don't want your stuff in their yard, and they don't want your stuff in their yard. Yep. It's, you know, then there's like the music thing. There's, you know, what time of day you can actually mow your lawn if you have a lawn. You know, there are all these unwritten rules in suburban environments as far as what you can and you can't do.
That's an interesting thing, because if you look at the movie, like, one of the first things they're doing is they're complaining about the Klopeks because their yard is, you know, poorly maintained. They haven't cleaned it or anything. And it's all dying. And yeah, they're, you know, in the suburbs you are very territorial. This is my parking lot. This is, you know, this sidewalk. That's fine, but everything on this side of the sidewalk is mine. Stay off. But one of the interesting things in this film is that the trash, they just rip that out, they throw it in the street, and it stays there the entire film. No one picks it up. It's because, well, that's the street. That's not my property. even though I put it there.
Yeah, it's that the community needs to take care of that. That's not mine.
Yeah. Well,
Like we can all police each other, and I can measure your grass to see if you've been cutting it recently. But God forbid I pick up the trash I threw in the streets when the Garbies were here.
Yeah. Well, and the same thing extends, like, if I do something to your property, right? At the end of the movie, once the house is, blowing up and burning down, Rumsfeld walks up and just like, you're going to have a lawsuit on your hands, mister. We just burned down your house and we're going to sue you because it's on your property.
Yep. Oh, man. We were digging in your basement and,
We struck a gas line.
Oh, that's so great.
We didn't, however, actually look into the furnace. So
now I made a post this week talking about the history of lawns and how lawns were a way for the rich to say, we don't have to use all of our land to eat. We can just cultivate it and make it beautiful instead, And then it became also, we can afford to have this many people come and hand cut our lawn every day to keep it looking this way. And it was just this status of richness. And I think it's interesting how that's moved into the suburbs. Like when I lived in South Dakota, I lived in Yankton, South Dakota, and I think they still do this, but I'm not positive. But there was the lawn of the month, according to the newspaper, and people worked their asses off to be the chosen one who got the picture of their lawn in the newspaper, and they'd get a little sign that said lawn of the month, and people would drive by and see their lawn, and I'm like, what the fuck, man? What the actual fuck? But it's interesting to me how that's also used to keep people out. Like, if you have to work 2 jobs, you can't take care of your lawn. And so now we had neighbors who would just come over and bitch at you about it. Now we have police agencies called the HOA to come and make sure that you're keeping everything up. And the best part is you get to pay them to tell you what a shitty job you're doing with your yard. It's fantastic.
And if they have to, there are actually cities that can give you tickets for it. You're not maintaining this or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you guys grow up in suburban areas? Has it been that way for both of you your entire life, or were you ever in something more rural or maybe very urban?
It was pretty much suburbs. For me, even when my parents were in the military and we lived on base, because even on base, you didn't have an HOA, but there was still that element of the suburbs within military installations.
Yeah, I was going to say, it might almost be worse because it is so, everything's so accustomed to being perfect that I would imagine they're extra crazy about it. Are they?
Yes.
That sounds about right.
As far as what I remember, it was pretty, I wouldn't say it was pretty strict, but it was pretty much, you knew what was expected of you. Grass better be mowed. And really in a lot of places, this is like 30 years ago. There weren't that many frills or anything. So it's basically make sure your trash is out on trash day and your grass is mowed. But there were definitely no cars, parked in the yard or on blocks or anything like that. There was nothing like that because, the MPs would probably come by and tell you got an issue, or somebody's going to go to your command and say, hey, you got somebody who's living in on-base housing and their house looks like shit. And they take a lot of stuff a lot more seriously in the military than in the sane world.
Yes, I would think living on a military base would kind of be like living in a suburb that operates almost like a small town, where you're probably getting a lot of that same sort of interpersonal, everything about everyone that you would in a small town. But then like the HOA policing and, everything on the street has to be neat and clean. And but I've never lived on one, so I would just assume.
I would think it would be even worse because you have to work with these people as well. You can't just get away from them there. I can't go to work and bitch about my neighbor because, oh shit, that's you.
I guess that is a way of controlling any of the gossip that's out there, but
I would totally be that guy. I would walk right up to my neighbor at work and be like, "Oh my God, my neighbor is such an asshole.
Their kids are so dumb."
Oh man, no. So I grew up in I would call it the suburbs. I don't really know. But I feel like my parents were the suburb police. Like that's why I coined this term. Like I feel like my dad went out of his way to mow all the time just so that he could bitch about people who didn't. So I don't think it was so much that there was outside pressure. Like maybe there was, but a lot of our neighbors were way older. I mean, I'm talking like 40 years older than my parents, you know? So like while they were 30, okay, maybe 30 years older. Like while my parents were like in their 30s, these guys are in their 60s or their early 70s, you know? And then my dad's like, so-and-so hasn't mowed in a couple weeks. Look how crazy it's getting over there, you know? And I feel like it was probably more him like just wanting to bitch about others, so he had to be better first. And then, you know, like I said, my mom's crazy and she just watches everybody. So whatever.
I mean, that's a valid thing as far as complaining about the neighbors to I guess, I don't want to say assert your dominance, but to separate yourself from them by saying, oh, well, I'm doing all the stuff I'm supposed to be doing. You know, my lawn is mowed. I don't leave any cars outside on the curb. Parked outside of my house for too long. I don't throw any parties. So you do have people that, you know, point themselves as, you know, the neighborhood alphas or whatever you could call them, as far as stating or believing that they are the ones who are doing all the right stuff in the neighborhood. And if you do anything other than that, you're a shitty neighbor.
And of course, now they're all the ones showing up on YouTube videos and getting called Karen. So
pretty much, yeah. Oh man. Hey, I want to move this really fast. One of my favorite scenes in this is when the families all go visit the Klopeks.
Yes.
I love that the wives come along because that's what's expected. I love how Carrie Fisher is like, oh, we should have done this sooner. I can't believe we waited this long. Like just all these little niceties that make me insane about the suburbs because it's all so incredibly fake. And yet it's the role you're supposed to play. And I think that this scene is so fantastic because you have Ray freaking out. Like he's so fucking nervous. It's ridiculous. And then you have Rumsfeld like walking around, like basically starting an interrogation, you know? And I like how everybody is in their expected social role and yet not. And I feel like this is such a powerful scene. And I never had to go to somebody's house when they moved in. Like we never went to visit the new neighbors. Like we waited till they were outside, you know? And I know that's an ongoing problem with the Klopeks is that they're never outside unless it's 3 a.m. and they're digging. But like we didn't do that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's normal or not. Like, do you guys have any input on that or?
As far as the welcoming committee thing?
Yes. And I'm sure you've never heard of that in the South.
Yeah. Welcoming committee means something completely different in some of these areas. But it normally doesn't involve a platter. It involves, you know, not a sheet cake, but sometimes sheets. But I think the issue here is you have these things that take place, but I don't see them as taking place as often as what you would have seen in the 60s, 70s, well, the 50s through the 80s. I don't see it as common anymore because neighborhoods change. You don't have this moment where, you know, you got people who've gotten to know each other over, let's assume, you know, 10 years that they've been living together, or at least living around each other, to where they kind of know each other enough to where the wives all feel bad, or both wives feel bad because it's, oh, you've been here for 2 months. We feel bad. We haven't welcomed you. We should have come over sooner. To where they've kind of appointed themselves to have that role because they're on a cul-de-sac. It's an enclosed area, or as the garbage men say, or the garbies say, you know, I hate cul-de-sacs because there's one way in and one way out. You should have a closer relationship with the people on the cul-de-sac because you're going to see them every day. Walter's going to see everybody every day, and everyone should see Walter every day as he goes and leaves. But the whole idea of a welcome committee, I had mine, but I didn't have anybody coming into my house, and I don't understand the whole idea of going into someone else's house to welcome them. My wife, the thing that freaked her out the most when she first came here was watching shows like the housing shows, like I can't remember what they're called, but the ones where the people go buy the houses and then they evaluate and say things like, well, this one's great, but it's not out of our budget. Yeah, this place has a lot of House Hunters. Thank you. Has a lot of space for entertaining. And she's like, entertaining? And she looked at me. She's like, people actually do that. I was like, well, yeah, some people do, but we're not going to fucking do it.
You don't answer the door when I come over.
Yeah. And she really got freaked out when she watched one of the episodes of The Office, and they gave tours of their homes. And she's like, do people actually do that here? I was like, not in this fucking house. They don't. Because it's one of those things that it's odd from my perspective that if it's someone that you're welcoming or someone's visiting your home for the first time, you're not giving them a tour of your home or showing them around. You might, if you're an invited guest, hey, let's sit down and have something to eat or watch the game. But, James, I've known you for 10 years. I'm not walking you through my fucking house to show it. Hey, and here's where I, go to the bathroom, and here's this place.
I have webcams everywhere. I already know the layout of your house.
But yeah, it's an odd 1950s on thing that helps build that peer pressure and that social expectation of what you should be doing in the suburbs by getting to know your neighbors and watching them even more.
That's an interesting question because I've never actually thought about it. I mean, we know the conventions in movies, but I can't remember a single time where that has happened. And I moved around a bit, mostly like when I was younger, it was apartments. I think when I was about 10 was the first house I lived in, and then moved to a couple others. I can't remember a single time where the neighbors have ever like knocked on the door and said, hi neighbor, we brought you some cookies. Even just the greeting part of it, not let alone the walking in the house and, this is my wife, this is the cat. I don't recall that ever happening. And I think maybe once or twice when I moved, I thought, well, maybe like where I live right now, I actually live in a suburb, but I live in a triplex. So I'm in it's a house, but it's 3 different units. And when I first moved in here, I thought, well, maybe it would be a nice gesture since we're technically connected and in the same structure to just go bring them some cookies or something like that. And the thought, it lasted maybe 30 seconds. And I was like, no, that's stupid. I'm going to keep to myself. And
yeah, that's what I would do.
I'm sure they're happy. I chose to keep to myself, and I'm happy they, for the most part, keep to themselves. So,
yeah.
Well, you reminded me of. I was going to say you reminded me of something. Both of you actually. And Tracy Morgan had a comedic bit that he included where he talked about him moving to the suburbs. He's like, I grew up in Marcy Projects. I grew up around poverty. This. Said when I had money, I moved to the suburbs. And you're expecting like this big thing that's going to come out of this big transformational moment where he's talking about things being so different. But he says, I moved in. And this little old white lady, I looked through the peephole. I had my do-rag on. I had a white T-shirt, my boxer shorts, and I went to go, answer the door because I didn't know who it was. Somebody was knocking at my door. So he says he saw her through the peephole. It was a little old lady. He opened the door, and she screamed and ran off. And he said, and he's like, I figured out she was part of the welcoming committee. I mean, of course, it's a joke. It's like she's part of the welcoming committee because, she dropped a basket of muffins, and it said, welcome to the neighborhood. But I can't help but, she ran off yelling like she was Paul Revere. The N-words are coming. The N-words are coming. The N-words. And so he's sitting there joking. He's like, yeah, she could say whatever she wanted. Those muffins were good. I don't give a shit what she said. Those muffins were good. And so it just got into, he broke down the suburbs in so many different ways with that one joke where he talked about de facto segregation, redlining, this idea of building generational wealth and moving to the suburbs, the covenant contracts that, like all these things. He's sitting there like it was a really nice neighborhood. She wasn't expecting a black person to open the door.
Wow. Hey, so the show Blackish, when it first opens in the first episode, Anthony Anderson's outside taking care of his yard because it has to be perfect so that no one around has anything to say to him because he's black. And I think that, but I think that it's interesting how, like, the suburbs overall have that. They have I have to take care of things so that people don't come at me, right? So my question to you is, as a black man who has lived in the suburbs, have you experienced that same thing? I have to go the extra step with my yard because it's the suburbs. Everybody's already watching each other. Like,
yes, and yes. And I'll even one up you, or at least add one thing to it. My mother, about 30 years ago when we moved back into the South, she pointed that out. And she said, wherever we live, I'm making sure that our yard is always going to be done. This is going to be done. We're not going to, if somebody comes to visit, like they're not going to park on the curb. They're going to park on the driveway. She had all these rules because she was like, I don't want someone thinking that, she used different types of language at the time. But I don't want somebody complaining about us. And, I didn't get it at that moment, but she was like, we're not going to be, people that have a car in the yard and doing this. And so whenever, my mom has had, dealt with a lot of, I guess, growth as far as her upbringing in rural Virginia and then through the military, she's kind of like, no, because I don't want anybody seeing me as a stereotype or a caricature. Because what they see with a black neighborhood is people partying, drinking, doing all this other stuff, yards not taken care of. It's like, if they see me, they're not going to see that. And I don't even, it got to the point where she would wake me up early on the weekend to go mow the lawn because she did not want her lawn looking fucked up.
And maybe she just wanted to annoy the neighbors by making you mow early.
No. I mean, look, this was in Georgia. So when the light was up at like 5:30, it was not uncommon for somebody to be out at 7:00 in the morning on a Saturday mowing the lawn. I thought it was my mom didn't want me out in the heat. It was she did not want her yard looking fucked up.
Do you think it's sort of? I mean, we've been talking this whole time about in suburbs, everyone's watching everyone all the time. Yeah. That I need to have the best lawn. We need to get it in the morning. We need to do all that sort of stuff. No one's parking, out on the street. Do you think it's to make sure no one's looking?
I think that's what it comes down to. If there's nothing for them to talk about, or there's nothing for them to see, there's nothing for them to talk about.
Okay. That's interesting.
Other than maybe they would see you as the Klopax as far as, I never see that family outside. They never talk to anybody. They never do anything. Then they have nothing to talk about at that point. It's kind of like, oh, I just see this. I saw this guy washing his car one day, or I saw, him mowing the lawn, or I saw his wife checking the mail. That's kind of like where a lot of people I can understand wanting to be seen. As far as like that's the limitation. I don't want you to see me. I don't want you to see me dragging like big trash to the curb and, oh my gosh, they got a new big screen TV or a flat screen or whatever. Yeah. Because then it's even like, no, I don't even want you to know what the hell I have in my house. I don't want you to know anything that goes on in my house.
Going back to them going to the Klopax house, maybe they've never done this before. Maybe this is totally an excuse to go in the Klopax house, right? Because when they go to Walter's house, they don't seem like they've ever been in there.
No, but Walter hasn't broken any of those conventions, though. His yard is clean. there's no reason for them to go in his house.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Michael?
I didn't get the impression at all that they were acting as if it's something normal.
Right.
Everyone in that scene seems kind of uncomfortable and like, wow, this is weird. Particularly since you've been here a month. Here's some sardines. The Klopeks are a little freaked out. They're all freaked out. Like, it's not a comfortable situation for any of them.
Well, and they even say that they never went to visit the Knapps, who lived there before the Klopeks. So I want to go back to something Don said way earlier, that given where Walter's house is, everyone should see him come and go all the time, right? How are these people constantly watching each other and nobody sees him leave? And it's not just, oh, it's 8 p.m. We all went to bed, because Feldman's probably still up. Art doesn't seem like he sleeps. Rumsfeld seems like he just paces all fucking night to me. I feel like somebody should have seen this, and that it was something really easy to fix by just putting Walter's house at the end of the street, or I guess that's the end of the street, where it connects to the next street.
Right.
And I think that would have actually been really funny, because it would have pointed out that as much as we watch each other, oh, look at that, he can just leave.
Well, I was going to say, I didn't get the sense he left on his own.
Oh, no, he didn't.
Yeah, so,
but I mean, like I feel like somebody should have seen this, especially because he didn't leave on his own. Everything about it is weird. It's like, is it his daughter that takes him? It's her car.
Yes.
You know, it's like all of these different things that would be totally out of the ordinary. And for a bunch of people that watch each other all the fucking time, this should have stuck out like crazy.
but like Don pointed out, they're not looking at him because his yard is immaculate. His dog poops in someone else's yard, Queenie goes elsewhere. But the yard is really well kept, and he's older, and he keeps to himself inside. And so they're not looking at him.
That's true.
I think what may have happened with Walter is this, because they all have their garages. And I'm sure that his daughter, since she apparently must live locally, has a garage door opener. She probably went in the garage, walked him down into the car in the garage, and then drove off in a different car. So no one was looking for, oh, there's Walter driving away at 9 o'clock. They might have thought, oh, his daughter came over to visit him, brought him something to eat, or maybe they went to dinner, something like that, to where you're not expecting anything that's out of the norm for him, because I'm sure they've seen his daughter's car before. Well, so it's not like, an ambulance came screaming down the street.
Oh, yeah,
to come pick him up. So I think it's possible, but yeah, it would. I think that's more the comedic element of they're watching each other so much, or watching the Klopeks so much, that they completely miss something that should have been obviously handled early on. Oh, where's Walter? Oh shit, his daughter came to get him. And James, you might have said this earlier, but this is one of those things in this film that's easily fixed by cell phones, or well, hell, it would be easily fixed, just by picking up the phone and calling the hospital and say, hey, one of our neighbors is missing. Or, I'm sorry, not the hospital, but calling in a silver alert. One of our neighbors is missing. He's an elderly man. No one's seen him in in a day or whatever. We're concerned. Those go out quickly, and it would, I'm sure as soon as the daughter saw the silver alert, she'd say, "Oh no, I've got him. I took him to the hospital. Cancel the alert."
Yeah, or even a wellness, and it kind of goes back to
wellness check.
You don't call the cops when you find a human bone in the yard. No one thinks that maybe we should call the cops when Walter's missing. It's sort of weird, but I think the other reality of it is, we do see them inside the house sometimes where they're having breakfast or they're talking or they're watching films. I think the suburbs give you a false sense of knowing your surrounding, because you believe everyone's watching everyone and everyone's in everyone's business. But meanwhile, you're in your house most of the time, and you might occasionally look out the window and you see your neighbors when you walk outside. Unless you actually interact with them and are friends with them, you really don't know them. And there's a lot that goes on. You only really pay attention to what's making noise or what's right in front of you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not on that. No. I'm really charged up for this ending of the film.
Really, right before we get to the ending here, because I don't know how charged up you are and if I'm going to get to say this or not. No, did you know that there's an alternate? There's a couple alternate endings that were taped.
Really?
And yeah, and they featured different stuff in the Klopex trunk. And I thought that this was so interesting. And one of them is the one I wish they would have gone with. Because as great as the excessive amount of skeletons in there is, like, it'd be fun if it was one or two, right? But it's like, it's a lot. Anyway, yeah, they had dead cheerleaders in there. But the one that I wish they had gone with, they had the cut up remains of the garbage men, the Garbies, as art.
Holy shit, that would have been awesome.
So
and
that's
I
why
think that would be so fantastic if
the trash
one of the
never got
garbage
picked
guys
up?
wasn't. Yes. Isn't that great? The garbage men can never come back because they're dead. That's fantastic to me. And I love that it's the doctor from Voyager is one of the garbage men. I would love to have seen him in the trunk. I think this would be a great ending. Anyway, all right, let's talk ending. Go for it, Don.
All right. I like this ending, and then the parts of the ending I love because in this film, you're being dragged to this point where you're starting to even question if the Klopex have done anything. I mean, they're weird. We get it. They're strange. They're foreign. They sound funny. You know, they're checking off all those boxes that xenophobes love to see when they're complaining about immigrants.
They wear lederhosen. It's terrible.
That was yeah. The lederhosen was a little bit too much for me. But yeah, you know, when Art and Ray are in that basement, going through trying to find something, and they strike the gas line, and this awesome moment where Art is running out of the house. He's like, "It's gonna blow," and he's running. The house explodes. The entire neighborhood sees this, and then Ray, Tom Hanks's character, comes walking or stumbling out of the house, blown up, just completely just rocked by everything that took place. And it's one of those, the detectives, everyone's there talking about what had gone on and why this guy could have done it. He's a pathologist, this guy wouldn't possibly be out there doing this. And Ray himself sits there, like, Art, you're an idiot. We're the lunatics. We're the idiots out here doing all this stuff. We blew up their house. And that's a great thing to have if it had gone the other way of, like, we're the fucking problem. They're not the problem because they're weird. And you get that nice, cute reveal after Tom Hanks goes on a very Tom Hanks-ish bit where he basically says, "You know what? I want to go to the hospital. Take me to the hospital." Jumps on the gurney, slides a little bit, picks it up, then throws it into the ambulance, jumps on top of it, and his wife, to allude to what we talked about before, his wife is like, "Okay, honey, I'll see you at the hospital." Just kind of like, you need your fucking time. You need to process this. But what's great is we now get that reveal from the doctor saying, like, yeah, I did all that shit. I got away with it.
Really fast. That was not in the script. I looked it up to see. Tom Hanks completely added that. And I mean, looking at it, you can tell it's a Tom Hanks bit, you just said. But I had to know. So I looked it up, and sure enough, he did it, and they loved it so much they left it in.
I swear, it makes me question if the peeing bit from A League of Their Own was him or if it was scripted. With the extra shakes and facial movements.
I'll put money on it being him.
But you get this cool reveal where now the doctor is admitted to doing it. He's gonna kill him because, as we talked about with the serial killer episode, there's always this need with serial killers. I gotta fucking tell you that I did it. Like, I don't like this anonymity. I want you to know that I did it. I want to reveal it to you. I'm going to kill you, but I'm going to get this off my chest to let at least somebody know, yeah, you were right. It was me. And here I am trying to kill you. They have their nice little fight. Peter Pan or Pinocchio drives the ambulance into Art's house. And then they fall out of the back of the ambulance fighting, and there's still this debate or this discussion over what's taking place. Knocks the trunk open, and Corey Feldman's character reveals to the police, "Hey, we got something over here," which has completely made every penny he spent on pizza worth it.
Oh yeah.
Because now all of his friends know, "Hey man, you are not full of shit. You were telling us something was going to go down." And now we get the reveal that the Klopex, at least one of the Klopex, was involved in killing people. But I think what would have been really cool if they do redo this film, it should be the real estate agent. They're killing people to get these homes and to resell, because that would have made more sense as opposed to, yeah, we wanted the house, they wouldn't sell it to us, so we killed them.
Man.
What do you guys think about the ending? I mean, does it work for you? I mean, it's great that you have the comedy there. You have that the villain finally taking the mask off. But what do you guys think about the ending? Or should it have been changed? I mean, should you have had the garbage men, or maybe even the remains of some clowns in there?
I like the idea of the garbage man because that would have explained a lot.
Poor Garbies.
I mean, there's a great punchline, of course, when the trunk comes up and, Feldman looks in and is like, "Hey, guys." And so that moment's good. Obviously, just a bunch of skulls in there is kind of weird. But then they do kind of have a crematorium in their basement. So it works on that level. I guess my problem with it as an ending is, because it's a comedy, it works. If it weren't a comedy, why not just let him go to the hospital and drive away? Your house is burned down. You got away with it all. Why do you have to do this?
Yeah.
And so I have that problem with it. And also I have the problem we sort of talked about where, hey, all these weird behaviors and this judgmental sort of, what's that guy up to? And they're foreigners and I don't trust them. Turns out I was right. So, I mean, that's a bit problematic. But the film itself, as a comedy, the ending's pretty classic. And certainly Tom Hanks's performance there is great.
Oh, yeah. I have a problem with his reason for being there. Because he's like, "What did you see? What did you see? What did you see in my basement?" And you're going to kill him either way. What does it fucking matter what he saw? Like, you're not going to reveal this and then let him go away. So that's weird to me. At least the part where he's saying, "I lost a skull over there. I'm going to get a skull from you." That's at least a better reason to me. It's not a great reason, but it's a reason. And he clearly collects skulls. Like, we saw that much. I think it's weird how much, I don't know. There's all this stuff about like the trash and the digging in the backyard. And then they have a crematorium. Like, that doesn't really add up to me. So I have problems with that. But overall, I like the ending, like you said, because it's a comedy. Without that, no, there's way too much shit here. That's a huge problem to me. But yeah, it really just came down to why the fuck is he asking him what he saw? It doesn't matter. Like, just fucking kill him while you have your shot.
Yeah, I guess if it doesn't end that way, it's a crappy movie. Right. For the type of movie, for way it plays itself. If it doesn't end that way, people are going to leave the theater saying, "Well, that was crappy. I thought that was supposed to be a lighthearted thing. Now I've got all these questions."
Oh, man. So I have something else I want to talk about that's just really interesting choice to me. So I don't know if you guys know this, but this entire thing was filmed on the Universal backlot. And the reason that this suburb is so normal to us is that it's repeatedly been used in things.
Is it the Leave It to Beaver?
It is. Leave It to Beaver was filmed there. Desperate Housewives is the one that was filmed the most there, to the point that that's what it's known for now. It's the Desperate Housewives neighborhood. But the real kicker is Corey Feldman's house and why they never show it from a distance. It's the Munsters' house. And so they can only show that little bit. And that's why you always see like just his porch or just his door or things like that, because it's the fucking Munsters house. And I gotta wonder, why the fuck didn't you give the Klopeks the Munsters house? That's so weird to me.
That's an interesting fact, because in a way he responds to all the craziness going on in the neighborhood the way the monsters would. It's like, oh, look, there's a dragon over there breathing fire and everything. Let's go say hi to the neighbors.
Our poor ugly niece. Oh, it must be terrible looking for her. Yeah, but I thought that was so fascinating that out of everything that's been filmed there, the Munsters house is still fucking there. And then I was just like, why would you give it to Feldman? So, yeah.
Well, because then there would have been no doubt.
See, I think if you're gonna go with the reveal that it's not them, like it's Walter doing shit in his basement, I think you definitely give them the Munsters house.
Yeah, it would have been a little bit too obvious, but
it'd be great. All right. I don't have anything left in my notes. Do either of you?
I'm good.
No, I think covered everything I wanted to talk about.
Cool. Well, then let's go ahead and wrap this up. So I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hope it wasn't too miserable.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, it's great.
I've had a great time.
I am working on some projects. I've got a novel I'm revising. And then I do this thing every Halloween, or I have been for the last 2 years. I'm going to do a third one this year, where through the month of Halloween, just every day, I write a new flash fiction story, generally about 1,300 words. After this Halloween, I'm going to compile it, hopefully, into a book and maybe some sort of digital experience as well.
That works. And I think that that's a really interesting thing. I believe that last year was the first Halloween I saw you do this, but the way you did like all of October and you were doing this, I thought that was such a cool thing to do.
Yeah, and I just had a simple rule, because obviously it could be time consuming. So the rule was you have to write it and post it in an hour. So write it, edit it, and throw it on Facebook in an hour. And for the most part, the first year I was able to get all 25 under an hour. The second year I didn't get all 25 close, because I started on the October 6th to the 31st. So 25 days. Cool. I think maybe one or two stories ended up taking like an hour and 10 minutes. So I fudged it a little bit, but most of them are only around 12 to 1,300 words. But I think outside of a few stinkers, I think there's actually some good stories there. So
I don't know that I could do that. Like, my brain just doesn't work that way. I spend way too much time investigating the smallest little detail that doesn't matter and never even makes the book. So that would literally, I would spend all of October on my first story. So I find it fascinating, and I really can't wait to read them this year.
Well, and I have them all in my notes on Facebook. If you're just looking for a quick 4 or 5 minute horror story, there's a bunch of them there. But yeah, some of them were really like, it'd be like 10:30 at night. I'm going, crap, I'm not going to make it tonight. And something would pop into my head, and I would just like go immediate from having, the idea just popped into my head, and 2 minutes later I'm sitting down and writing it. But it was pretty challenging.
I think that's great.
See if I could do it again this year.
Awesome. Well, cool. So thank you once again for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I had a great time. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I try to catch it every episode, unless it's a movie I have not seen, in which case I'll come back to it after I watch the movie. But a big fan of the podcast. I appreciate listening to your guys' views and takes on it, and you've had some great guests, and hopefully I'm not at the bottom of that list, maybe somewhere in the middle. But but I did enjoy being here, and I appreciate it once again, you guys inviting me to join this conversation.
Absolutely. All right, so that wraps it up for this week. As always, I am James Sabata.
And I am Don Guillory.
And we'll see you next week here on the Necronama.com.